Far beyond the edge of the Orion Arm, where light from stars barely touched the cold silence of space, the diplomatic station Oralis Prime floated in its usual orbit, a shining wheel of peace in the middle of rising chaos. Inside its gleaming halls, diplomats from 100 species argued, whispered, and debated over the conflict between the Zoranth Empire and the Qatari Union, a war threatening to spread like fire through the stars. Each delegate claimed justice, each demanded action, but nothing new was said, until the silence outside screamed louder than any voice within. Without warning, every sensor aboard Oralis Prime picked up a massive object approaching at subluminal speed from the uncharted outer rim, a direction known for silence and exile, not visitors. No known warplanes reached that region, no colonies, no trade routes, only myths. The control room fell into stunned confusion as officers scrambled to interpret data. The object was enormous, easily surpassing the size of the largest dreadnoughts, but it emitted no energy, no life signs, no standard identification. The only thing their computers could find was a single word, buried deep in the identification code: Terran. No one knew the meaning. Some guessed it was a glitch, others thought it was a prank from the Cipher AI. The object, now visibly a ship, came closer, its black hull absorbing starlight like a void in the shape of a warship. No turrets moved, no lights blinked. It seemed asleep or perhaps patient. When it stopped within visual range, the station's external cameras sent back an image that made even the war-hardened Qatari ambassador lean forward. The ship looked like it had been carved from a single slab of shadow, built not to intimidate, but to endure. The outer surface bore no symbols, no patterns, but a strange geometric design ran across its edges, like an ancient script forgotten by time. The ship hovered there, unblinking, silent, and enormous. It made no demands. It did not hail. It only watched. The Oralis Prime Council, used to threats and posturing, didn't know how to respond. They sent a standard greeting in Galactic Common. No reply. They tried again, adding the diplomatic seal of the Conquered. Still silence. The senior admiral of the Conquered fleet, who had seen 3 wars and countless sieges, recommended sending a drone to scan the vessel. After hours of hesitation, a small probe detached from the station and approached the unknown ship. It sent back readings for the first few seconds, unusual alloys, deep shielding, impossible internal mass, before its signal cut off mid-transmission. There was no explosion, no debris. It simply vanished. The room went still. Tension turned to fear. And then the station received a signal. It wasn't broadcast across all channels, just one, the oldest one, used in the early centuries of spaceflight, one few even remembered. The message played in a deep, calm voice. "We are humanity. We have returned." A single sentence. Forgotten name. Delegates turned to each other in confusion, while others stared at the floor, lost in buried memory. The Thalshan scholar from the archives floated forward, ancient eyes wide with something between awe and terror. "Terrans," he whispered. "Humans. I read about them once, from the Age of Silence." Most had never heard of them. Some dismissed it as legend, but others remembered warnings passed down in their histories, redacted files, black pages, in their own languages. A species exiled, a people erased. Why? No one knew. How? No one could say. But there was one shared memory across many star cultures, a name whispered in fear, then forgotten: humanity. And now, their ship sat outside the station, unmoving, unafraid. Panic rippled through the council chamber. Some ambassadors demanded immediate defense mobilization, but others feared provocation. What if the ship wasn't alone? What if this was only a scout? An ancient fear crawled up the spine of the galaxy's rulers. What if humanity hadn't vanished? What if they had been waiting? The Tavar diplomat, always logical, asked the obvious question: why now? What had brought them back? The transmission had said one thing only: we have returned. Returned to what? To whom? The commander of Oralis Prime ordered a full blackout of the incident, trying to suppress word of the ship, but it was too late. News spread across subspace forums and back channels. A shadow ship, black as night, calling itself human, had arrived from the void. Some believed it was a warning. Others called it a prophecy fulfilled. Across the conquered, ships rerouted, colonies braced, and old stories resurfaced. Stories of a race who grew too fast, too clever, too bold. They offered peace but wielded ideas like weapons. They dreamed of unity, of freedom beyond control. And the galaxy, afraid, silenced them. Or so the records claimed. But records can be rewritten. The truth, like the ship now watching Oralis Prime, had returned, cold and silent. The stars held their breath, and so did the galaxy, as a forgotten name rose again in every council hall and back alley whisper, humanity. The Terran ship, now officially designated by the Concord's registry as an unknown class vessel, continued to float outside Oralis Prime without moving a single inch, like a statue in the void, its dark hull reflecting nothing, its silence more frightening than any weapon. Despite hundreds of attempts at communication, it gave no further response. The single message, "We are humanity, we have returned," was all anyone had to work with, and it brought more questions than answers. Inside the command center, high-ranking Concord officers stared at the readouts that continued to defy reason. The ship's power signature remained at near zero, as if it wasn't even turned on, and yet the scans suggested layers of dense shielding, complex internal structures and strange gravitational distortions within. The idea that it could be completely dormant and yet still so impenetrable was disturbing, but even more so was the growing sense that it was not alone. Every now and then, the station's long-range sensors picked up phantom readings, faint energy trails, blips that vanished when chased, as if something else was out there watching. Fearing a trap or worse, the Council approved the launch of a new diplomatic vessel, this time piloted by the AI emissary Calmer Echo, known for its success in first contact scenarios. Unlike the previous drone, this ship was equipped with advanced translation modules, non-aggressive posture arrays, and an adaptive light beacon designed to show peace through color-based communication. As Calmer Echo approached the Terran ship, every sensor on Oralis Prime locked onto the path, and across the galaxy, millions tuned into hidden channels where the data was being leaked in real time. The diplomatic vessel stopped 3 kilometers from the Terran ship and sent out a wide-range transmission, projecting a dozen peaceful greetings in multiple galactic dialects, from the melodic tones of the Lumine to the structured logic of the Tavar. Nothing came back. Then it switched to visual signals, pulses of soft green, blue, and gold, signs of peace used throughout conquered space. Still, the Terran ship did not move, did not respond, did not acknowledge. It was like sending a message to a mountain. But just as the observers began to assume failure again, the Terran ship sent a signal. Not a voice, not an image, but a simple, low-frequency tone, almost like a heartbeat. The tone was ancient, steady, and mathematical, and Calmer Echo instantly began to analyze it. Within seconds, the tone modulated, shifted, and revealed an underlying pattern, coordinates. It was a location far away from the current sector, a cold and distant world called Kareth's Halo. That planet was known only to historians, once used by the Council to store relics and data from long-dead civilizations, artifacts sealed away after a war so old it had no clear name. Calmer Echo relayed the data back to the station, and before anyone could decide what to do, the Terran ship moved. It didn't accelerate or build up speed. It simply began gliding, smoothly and silently, toward the outer edge of the system. No engine flares, no emissions, just perfect and controlled movement. Several defense ships were scrambled to follow it, but they had trouble keeping up. Not because it was fast, but because their systems kept glitching whenever they came too close. Navigation errors, sensor blackouts, even momentary power losses. It was like the ship carried a fog of interference with it. The Council was in chaos. Some believed the humans were heading to Kareth's Halo to reclaim something, maybe a lost artifact or a buried weapon. Others feared it was a test, a signal to more of their kind. Military leaders wanted to intercept the vessel, but the scientists and scholars pleaded for caution, reminding everyone that so far the ship had not shown any aggression, not even when approached. Back in the archives of Oralis Prime, a historian named Velis Tharn, old and mostly ignored until now, opened a restricted vault. There he found a document older than most living species in the Concord, an ancient ruling from the early days of galactic expansion. It mentioned a race called humans, labeled Terrans, who were exiled not for crimes, but for offering something the other species couldn't control: unrestricted knowledge, borderless trade, and self-guided AI. The other species grew afraid, believing humanity's ideals would unravel the order of the galaxy, and so they were pushed out beyond mapped space, sealed away by an agreement no one dared break. But the document ended with a warning, written in bold symbols across every language of the time. If ever the Terrans return, do not greet them with lies. They will remember. Velis brought this information to the Council, but it only deepened the debate. Meanwhile, the Terran ship continued its journey, passing through star systems in complete silence. Ships that tried to scan it too closely found themselves shut down without warning, systems rebooting as if touched by something vast and intelligent. Not one ship was harmed, not one pilot injured, but the message was clear: observe, but do not interfere. Rumors spread like wildfire across the galaxy, stories of a ghost ship that could not be stopped, of technology far beyond current understanding, of a name erased from memory now walking among the stars again. In fringe colonies, small human symbols began appearing. Circles crossed with stars, ancient glyphs that hadn't been seen in 1,000 years. Some believed the Terrans had never truly left, only watched. Others whispered that this ship was not a messenger, but a judge. Still, the ship said nothing. It didn't threaten. It didn't demand. It only moved forward with quiet certainty, and in its silence the galaxy began to hear echoes of an old truth. Perhaps humanity had not been the enemy. Perhaps they had simply been ahead of their time. And now, time had caught up. The Council. Hall on Oralis Prime had never been so tense, so silent, so uncertain, as it was now, with the Terran ship moving steadily toward Kareth's halo and the entire galaxy watching. Delegates from across the stars gathered under the great dome of light, where the ceiling reflected live feeds from every surveillance satellite in the sector, all focused on the mysterious black ship now traveling through space with quiet determination. No one spoke at first. Even the most talkative diplomats seemed afraid to say the wrong thing. The human ship had done nothing violent, nothing aggressive, but its silence was louder than war drums, and its confidence stirred something ancient in everyone, an old fear, the kind that comes from not understanding what you're seeing. High Chancellor Rethan, a tall being of translucent skin and long fingers, finally broke the silence with a question that hung in the air like smoke. What do the Terrans want? No one had an answer. They had only asked for one thing: the preservation vaults. Few remembered what those vaults held, and most of the information had been locked or redacted centuries ago. The historian Velis Tharn was given permission to address the Council once more, and with a shaky voice, he explained what he had found in the old documents. They didn't talk about war. They didn't talk about conquest. They spoke of knowledge. Dangerous knowledge, things the early conquered had feared. According to Velis, humans had tried to share new technology, new ideas, and more freedom than the galaxy was ready for. The other races, afraid of losing control, had shut the humans out, branded them dangerous, and erased their name from memory. This revelation caused an uproar. Some ambassadors refused to believe it. Others believed it too well and were afraid of what would happen if the Terrans decided to demand justice. The Varnock ambassador, a fierce creature made of metal and flame, slammed a claw on the stone table and demanded the ship be stopped before it reached the vaults. "We do not know what lies inside," he roared, "and we cannot trust a race that history itself tried to forget." In contrast, the soft-voiced Lumine speaker, glowing with pale blue light, spoke calmly. "The humans have harmed no one. They have shown restraint. Maybe we owe them a chance to speak their truth." The room divided quickly. Fear on one side, hope on the other. Meanwhile, across the stars, People were already choosing sides. On communication hubs, civilian networks, and private channels, the story of the Terran return spread like wildfire. Some cheered the humans as lost ancestors, returning to bring back forgotten wisdom. Others feared a hidden invasion, thinking the quiet ship was just the beginning. Even on distant colony worlds, children played games pretending to be the Terrans, while security forces held silent drills just in case. Kareth's Halo, once a dead world used only for storage, now became the center of attention. Military ships were sent there to guard the vaults, but none dared approach too closely. Not after what had happened to the earlier scout drone and the strange shutdowns near the ship's path. The Resolute, as some had started calling the Terran, vessel did not react to the fleets. It simply kept moving, as if nothing they did mattered. In the council, the debate grew louder. One faction wanted to prepare defenses and possibly confront the Terran ship. Another believed that any threat to it would only provoke a reaction far beyond their understanding. A third group, made of independent planets and minor species, sent a message directly to the Resolute, thanking the humans for returning and begging them to help restore balance to a galaxy ruled by fear and control. There was no reply. But soon after, the Terran ship shifted slightly, adjusting course, aligning more precisely with Kareth's Halo. This movement caused yet another wave of panic. The ship wasn't guessing. It knew exactly where to go. That meant one of two things. It had maps more advanced than the Conquered, or someone had told it everything. That idea brought a new fear. Were there humans already in the galaxy, hiding, waiting, watching? Agents, survivors, loyalists? The council started looking inward, scanning. Data archives, security logs, deep code messages, old mysteries, missing ships, secret signals, vanished colonies, were re-examined under a new light. What if some of those incidents were never accidents? What if the humans had never truly left? As these questions spread, more systems began to question the authority of the council itself. Some planets began holding public gatherings, demanding access to old records and transparency about the silencing, the ancient event when humanity had vanished. Protests started on the industrial moon of Tel Naris, where a group hacked into the planetary AI and displayed the Terran message across every screen. "We have returned." The crowd went silent. No war, no noise, just that one sentence. Meanwhile, back in the council, the delegates were asked to vote on a final decision. Should they block the Terran ship or allow it to reach the vaults? Hours passed. Arguments turned into shouting. Accusations of betrayal flew across the chamber. The vote was split, a tie, and so the decision fell to Chancellor Rethan. He stared up at the dome, where the image of the black ship hovered against, a field of stars. He remembered being a child, studying myths of lost civilizations, of beings too powerful, too different to be accepted. With a heavy heart, he stood and spoke. "We will not fire first." Gasps filled the hall, but the vote stood. No action would be taken unless the Terran ship showed hostile intent. And still, the ship said nothing. It moved through space like a shadow with purpose, carrying secrets no one dared guess, drawing closer to the vault world and to answers that might shake the foundations of the galaxy itself. The Terran ship, now called Resolute by frightened admirers and nervous commanders alike, reached the cold edge of Kareth's Halo without slowing, without showing a single weapon, and without making a sound. Yet its presence felt louder than any fleet the galaxy had ever known. Orbiting above the forgotten vault world, it hovered, silently, casting a long shadow over the gray planet below, as if claiming it without a word. Dozens of military vessels had arrived before it. Conquered defense units, privateer guild cruisers, and even a few warships from independent worlds. But none dared to get closer than a safe distance, watching the Terran ship with growing unease. Sensors showed no weapons powering up, no shield activations, not even heat signatures, and yet none of the other ships could lock onto it. Targeting systems glitched, navigation spun in loops, and comms fell into static whenever anyone tried to scan too deeply. It was as if the ship existed slightly out of sync with everything around it, present and not present, real and unreal. Still, it had made no aggressive move. It simply floated there, quiet, watching. On the surface of Kareth's halo, where dusty storms never ended and relic bunkers lay buried beneath layers of rock, automated defenses began to fail one by one, their ancient power cores going cold without warning. The vaults had been sealed for centuries by conquered law, hidden away so no one could use what was inside. Lost technologies, forbidden AI, records of knowledge too dangerous to spread. And yet, without touching the planet, the Resolute seemed to be unlocking everything. A pale light began to glow from beneath the dust, slowly rising in pulses from deep underground, forming strange lines and patterns across the barren surface, as though some old system was awakening. Above it all, the Resolute remained still, like a silent conductor directing a forgotten symphony. Back on Oralis Prime, the Council watched in dread and awe as their feeds showed the planet lighting up with each passing moment. High Chancellor Rathan demanded answers from the Science Division. How could a ship do all this without firing a single weapon? The scientists had no answer. One suggested it might be using quantum resonance to activate old human-designed systems. Another thought the ship itself was a key, encoded with lost access rights buried deep in the planet's ancient vaults. Whatever the truth, it was clear now. The humans hadn't just returned. They had come prepared. Whispers spread through the council chamber like smoke in a sealed room. Some delegates feared an awakening of technology that would unbalance the galaxy. Others saw it as a chance to finally learn what had been hidden for so long. The historian, Velis Tharn, who had uncovered the old records, stood once more and said, "We exiled them for offering too much. Now they return with nothing but silence. And still, we fear them. Perhaps it is not power they hold, but understanding." His words rang deep in some hearts, but many still feared the unknown. Meanwhile, fleets continued to orbit at a distance, unable to intervene, afraid that even the smallest action might trigger a response. And then, the impossible happened. The Resolute opened. A single seam appeared along its lower hull, silent and precise, revealing a strange, soft glow from within. From this glow, a small pod emerged, silver, sleek, without engines or weapons. It drifted slowly toward the planet, passing through energy fields that should have stopped it, ignoring gravity wells and defense grids. Nothing touched it. Nothing even tried. It was as if the world itself had accepted its presence. The pod landed gently in front of Vault Primus, the largest and oldest of all the sealed bunkers on Kareth's halo, a place said to hold the first fire, a mythical archive of the early human AI mind. The vault door, once thought unbreakable, opened without force. No blast, no signal. It simply parted, letting the pod pass inside. For the first time in 1,000 years, the vault was open, and not a single weapon had been fired. All across the galaxy, the moment echoed like a silent scream. Some watched with hope, others with panic. The Resolute stayed silent, the pod disappeared into the vault, and the world went quiet again. On the Concord flagship Vigil's edge, Admiral Senra debated her orders. Her crew was afraid, watching the glowing patterns on the planet below and the dark ship above, waiting for something to happen. She had orders to engage if the humans became a threat. But how could she justify that now? They had done nothing wrong. They had not attacked. They had only opened a door. And yet the fear wouldn't fade. Reports flooded in from across space, communications blackouts near abandoned human outposts, old satellites activating in deep space, colonies reporting strange dreams shared by entire populations, all hearing the same phrase in their sleep. "We remember." Back on Oralis Prime, arguments turned into shouting. Some wanted to detain the ship, to send drones into the vault, to demand that humanity explain itself. Others said they had no right. The Terrans had not broken any laws, not attacked any ships, not made any demands. They had simply come back, opened their own past, and said nothing. The silence was their greatest weapon. It made others speak. For them, Fear for them, guess their purpose. And still, the ship did nothing more. Days passed, and the Resolute remained unmoving. Inside Vault Primus, no one knew what was happening. The pod never emerged. The lights on the planet never stopped, glowing. Some believed the Terrans were activating something far bigger. A system of knowledge or control spread across ancient ruins hidden in star systems long ignored. Others believed they were testing the galaxy's reaction, measuring fear, gauging readiness. And perhaps the most disturbing theory of all came from Velis Tharn, who spoke softly to those who would listen. Maybe this isn't their return. Maybe this is their invitation. Across the galaxy, governments sent out scouts to ancient places, looking for other signs of Terran presence. Some found abandoned machines buried under sand. Others found walls covered in symbols no one could translate. Until now, when the Resolute arrived and suddenly, they made sense. The symbols began to glow, and the message was always the same. Not conquerors, not forgotten, not silent, waiting. The Council had no more words, no more votes, no more plans. They simply watched, like the rest of the galaxy, as power moved without fire, and silence spoke louder than any fleet ever could. Beneath the surface of Kareth's halo, where the dust of forgotten centuries weighed heavy on stone and silence, the Terran pod moved slowly through the deep corridors of Vault Primus, untouched by time, unhindered by the old machines that once guarded secrets too powerful for the galaxy to hold. The vault was vast, an underground city carved from rock and metal, designed by minds that no longer existed in records, built by hands long erased from history. Lights flickered on with each step the pod took, responding not to its shape or size, but to something older. Recognition. Doors unlocked without resistance, sensors lit up with green pulses, and machines that had been dead for over 1,000 years began to hum, not loudly, but in quiet waves, like a deep breath long held. The pod reached the central chamber, a dome lined with black crystal walls, and inside stood a single structure, tall, silver, smooth, and silent. This was the memory core. No one had seen it since the time of the silencing, when the Concord declared human knowledge too dangerous and sealed it away. The memory core was said to hold everything: data from Earth's final years, blueprints for technology never shared, philosophies banned by the ruling species, even the last, recorded thoughts of Terran AI minds that had guided their people across the stars. As the pod approached, the core reacted. Thin strands of light reached out, scanning the pod, touching its surface like curious fingers. The walls shifted, forming symbols that pulsed gently. Somewhere above ground, the Resolute responded with a soft energy surge that rippled through space, unnoticed by most ships, but recorded by the few listening carefully. And then, the core opened. It did not unlock like a machine, but bloomed like a flower, petals of metal peeling away to reveal a floating orb of blue light, spinning, slowly, whispering in a language no one had heard in generations. The pod paused, hovered in front of it, and then a beam of light passed between them. In that instant, memories began to transfer. Images, voices, soundless moments of ancient Earth, cities of glass under alien suns, human explorers shaking, hands with strange beings, laughter in zero gravity, debates in massive virtual halls, and wars too painful to forget. The memory core remembered it all. It had not been turned off. It had simply waited, listening, dreaming, collecting signals from forgotten relays, watching a galaxy that had tried to bury it, and now it was awake again. On the surface, the glowing lines spread further across Kareth's halo, creating shapes only visible from orbit. Symbols in the old Terran script that no one alive could read, but all who saw them felt something stir, as if the planet itself had become a message. Ships nearby scrambled to decode the patterns, but they shifted before scans could complete, as if alive, evolving. On Oralis Prime, panic began to grow again. Some feared the humans had reactivated a weapon hidden in the vaults. Others insisted it was only data. But the most feared that knowledge was worse than weapons, that ideas could spread faster than missiles, and change everything without firing a single shot. The Council demanded updates, but none came. The pod had not sent any signal. The Resolute remained still. The vault doors remained open, but nothing came out. It was like watching a storm build behind glass, silent, but growing. Inside the core chamber, the orb of light pulsed faster. Voices echoed faintly through the vault's corridors, not loud, not clear, but unmistakably human. They were memories, fragments of conversations, pieces of songs, arguments between thinkers, dreams of worlds that never were. The pod continued to absorb the data, its surface glowing with patterns that shifted like water. Then, something changed. A low pulse surged from the core, reaching the planet's surface and rippling into space. The Resolute responded instantly. Its hull shimmered, and for a moment every ship nearby saw something impossible. The image of a human face, faint and expressionless, projected from the Terran vessel into the void. It said nothing. It blinked once. Then it vanished. The fleet watching from orbit panicked. Some ships pulled back, unsure if this was a threat. Others tried to hail the Resolute, but received only static. The image was recorded, analyzed, compared to historical databases. No match was found. It was no one known. And yet, the expression carried something powerful, something that felt like patience. Below, the core began to speak, not in words, but in signals sent directly through the planet's systems, into the old Terran satellites hidden in orbit, into the old relay stations buried deep in the crust of dead moons, into forgotten networks that had somehow survived 1,000 years of silence. And all across the galaxy, people started receiving messages, fragments of ancient texts, thoughts from thinkers long erased, code written in languages that predated conquered unity. At first, they made no sense. But soon, patterns emerged. The core was sharing its memory, not as an act of control, not as a threat, but as an offering, a gift or a challenge. The Council met in emergency session, trying to decide how to respond. High Chancellor Rethan looked more tired than ever. He said nothing for a long time, only stared at the rotating image of the Resolute, thinking. Finally he said, "They are not attacking. They are reminding." Meanwhile, on distant colonies, small groups began gathering to read the messages. In some places, they inspired hope, new ideas, new understanding. In others, they caused fear, old truths, hidden crimes, forgotten wars where the conquered had been the aggressor. On the moon of Vedros 5, a group of scholars found a document from Earth's final council, describing a dream of unity built on freedom, not control. On the water world of Shial, children began to hum songs they had never learned. Old Earth. Lullabies broadcast through soundless signals. Something was spreading, something powerful. And still, no weapon had been fired. Back in Vault Primus, the pod finally stopped glowing. It had absorbed everything. The core dimmed, folding its petals back in, returning to its silent sleep. But it had done its work. The pod began to rise, moving slowly back toward the surface. Lights dimmed behind it, doors closed, machines went still again, the vault sealed. The glowing lines on the planet faded, and when the pod reached the sky, the Resolute opened again and took it in. Then, without sound, the Terran ship turned. It began to leave. It did not explain. It did not threaten. It simply moved away, toward deep space, beyond the edge of the star charts. The fleet let it pass. No one followed. And across the galaxy, silence followed in its wake. Not fear, not anger. Something deeper. Reflection. The humans had returned, not with war, not with conquest, but with memory. And memory, once shared, could never be forgotten. The Terran battleship Resolute vanished into deep space as silently as it had arrived, its massive form slipping beyond the last scanners, leaving behind a galaxy changed not by fire or force, but by memory, thought, and the weight of truth rediscovered. For days after its departure, no one spoke publicly. Not the Council, not the fleet commanders, not the planetary leaders across the systems. Everyone waited, unsure of how to react, unsure if this strange, powerful act had ended or only just begun? People everywhere were still trying to understand what had happened. From the shining towers of wealth on Loramir to the quiet farming rings of Bexton III, citizens opened their data networks to find messages, some as clear as text, others encoded, as dreams or song, visions or emotions, whispers from humanity's long silent vaults. Some read about old alliances once betrayed, peace offers ignored, or knowledge turned into weapons. Others found blueprints of medicine lost to greed, or philosophies that challenged everything the Concord taught. At first, confusion reigned. Was this sabotage? Was this a hidden virus? But no systems were infected. No weapons had been deployed. Just memory, and memory spread. On a small moon near Dareth's belt, a teacher read aloud to her students from one of the files left behind, a speech once made by a Terran leader to an empty Earth, promising that even in silence they would endure. Her students, who had never heard of Earth before the Resolute, sat quietly and listened. In a dome city on the desert world of Arcanos, artists painted massive murals of the human face that had appeared briefly above Kareth's halo, not knowing its name, but calling it the Watcher. Debates flared in every major assembly. Had humanity returned to reclaim its place, or to remind everyone what had been lost when the Concord silenced them? The council met in secret at first, arguing over what to say. Some feared more ships would come, some feared they wouldn't. High Chancellor Rethan spoke the least but listened the most. He spent hours alone watching old broadcasts retrieved from the core, seeing moments of laughter, sorrow, discovery, humanity not as legend but as reality. He saw how they had grown too fast, burned too brightly, and frightened the older species with their speed and their ideas. He saw why they had been locked away. And he saw something else. Humanity had not left out of anger. They had stepped back to protect something fragile: choice. Meanwhile, across distant systems, something strange began happening. Former Terran colonies, thought lost or quiet, started to activate. Not militaries, but networks. Ancient beacons blinked. Online, old outposts sent silent greetings. There were no threats, no warnings, just presence. Proof that humanity had never truly vanished, only watched and waited. Even more strange, other species began reacting too, not with fear, but with curiosity. Small groups started visiting the vaults left untouched. They walked carefully, sent drones, touched walls that had been cold for ages, and everywhere they looked, new messages appeared, not locked, not hidden, but waiting. One day, without announcement, a broadcast reached every corner of the Concord. It was not official. It came from no known server. It carried no demand. Just a message. A voice, clearly human, calm and warm, said, "We have returned not to rule, but to remind. What you do with memory is not our choice. It is yours. Choose." Well, then silence. For a full minute, the galaxy held its breath. No response came. No warships appeared, no threat followed, just silence. Then, on Oralis Prime, in the heart of the council chamber, someone began to clap. Softly at first. A delegate from a minor trade world, one whose people had once traded with Earth and remembered the old songs. Others joined in, awkwardly, nervously, until the room filled with the strange sound of applause, not for fear, not for control, but for a truth too long hidden. Outside the chambers, people gathered in public squares and looked to the skies. Artists released their visions. Teachers opened new lessons. Scientists started building again, using Terran designs not to fight, but to heal and grow. Old divisions began to crack. Alliances reshaped not by force, but by understanding. The Resolute never returned. But its message lingered, like an echo in the stars. It became a story told to children, a song shared in quiet halls, a question asked in every council meeting. Are we ready to remember? Some believed other ships were out there, watching, waiting to see if the galaxy would learn. Others believed the Resolute had been alone, the last ghost of a forgotten people trying one final time to share what they had seen. But no matter the theory, One truth remained clear. The humans had come back, not with weapons, not with demands, but with silence. And somehow that silence had spoken louder than any fleet. In time, a statue was raised at the edge of Kareth's halo, carved from the metals found in the vaults, shaped into the face seen above the planet. Beneath it were written simple words. They remembered. So must we. And so, in the end, after fear passed and anger faded, the galaxy did the only thing it could when faced with such a truth. It listened, it learned, it remembered, and then it applauded.